During a historic funeral, a dog walks through the crowd and, with an inexplicable gesture, unleashes a mystery that could change the spiritual destiny of the entire world. Michael gazed through the car window at the mountain silhouettes, sketched against the horizon like silent sentinels. Hope Ridge gradually appeared with its low houses and the church bell tower standing out against the landscape. The skyscrapers and chaotic traffic of Chicago now seemed a distant reality, almost like a dream from which he had just awakened. "Are you prepared to return?" asked the driver, a middle-aged man who knew every curve of that road. "I don't know if we can ever prepare for the past," Michael replied, running his hand through his dark hair. His mother's message still echoed in his mind. "Your grandmother Margaret needs to see you. It's urgent." 3 days later, here he was, temporarily abandoning the presidency of Oliver Industries, leaving behind endless meetings and an engagement sustained more by convenience than love. The car stopped in front of a stone and wood house, with a garden where medicinal herbs grew in organized beds. The familiar aroma invaded his nostrils, bringing memories he had tried to bury under layers of commitments and responsibilities. Dawn, his mother, appeared at the door, her grey hair tied in a bun, her face marked by time but her eyes still alive and penetrating. She hugged her son tightly. "You came back," she said, as if she couldn't believe it. "Your grandmother is waiting." Michael entered the house, immediately feeling enveloped by the atmosphere of the place. The smell of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, walls decorated with symbols he had never fully understood, the family altar with lit candles and old photographs. Everything was exactly as he remembered. In the back room, sitting in a rocking chair, was Margaret. At 90 years old, her figure was fragile, but her eyes, those eyes that seemed to traverse time, remained intense and vigilant. "My grandson has returned home," she said with a serene smile. Michael sat at her feet as he did when he was a child. "What happened, Grandma? Why did you call me with such urgency?" Margaret touched her grandson's face with wrinkled hands. "The time has come, Michael. The signs are appearing, and you are part of this." "Part of what?" he asked, confused. "Of the transition, of the awakening." She paused, observing him carefully. "You've been dreaming, haven't you?" Michael felt a shiver. How could she know about the strange dreams that had tormented him for months? Visions of places he had never visited, inexplicable sensations, as if something were calling him from afar. "They're just dreams, Grandma," he answered, trying to sound indifferent. Margaret smiled, like someone keeping a secret. "Nothing is just a dream for those who carry the gift. You need to stay, Michael. You need to relearn what you've forgotten." That night, settled in the room that had been his as a teenager, Michael couldn't sleep. Through the open window, he observed the stars shining intensely above the ridge, a spectacle impossible to see in the big city. The silence was interrupted only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. His thoughts wandered between the commitments abandoned in Chicago and his grandmother's enigmatic words. Why had he felt that irresistible urgency to return? Why, upon crossing the property's boundaries, did he have the sensation that something inside him finally calmed down? His phone vibrated. It was Melissa, his fiancée, asking when he would return. Michael typed a vague response and turned off the device. Here, in this place suspended in time, the demands of the outside world seemed distant and insignificant. He fell asleep almost at dawn and dreamed of the forest. He was walking among ancient trees, feeling observed by invisible eyes. Upon reaching a clearing, he saw a figure that seemed made of light. When he tried to approach, the vision transformed into a golden-coated dog, which looked at him deeply before disappearing into the shadows. He woke with a start, his body covered in sweat, despite the morning chill. Opening the window, he encountered a dense fog covering the property, creating an almost mystical setting. In the distance, through the mist, he could swear he had seen a golden dog watching him before disappearing among the trees. The days in Hope Ridge followed a different rhythm. Michael, accustomed to the frantic pace of business, now found himself immersed in a routine paced by nature's cycles. He accompanied Margaret on her morning walks to gather herbs, observed her skilled hands preparing infusions and ointments, listened with growing interest to stories about the family lineage. "Our ancestry comes from the guardians of the forest," Margaret explained, while separating dried rosemary leaves. "Since before the colonists, our Native American ancestors already knew the language of plants, animals, stones. Later, they mixed with escaped slaves who brought their own knowledge from Africa. That's how our tradition arose," Michael listened, divided between the skepticism he brought from the big city and an inexplicable sense of recognition, as if those words awakened a dormant memory in his blood. "And why did I distance myself from all this?" he asked. Margaret's face saddened. "Your father never accepted our ways. He took Dawn to the city, determined that you would have a modern education, away from what he called superstitions." She paused, looking out the window. "But the calling always finds a way to return. Look at you, here you are, just when the signs begin to appear." In the afternoon, Margaret led him through the yard to a natural spring that bubbled between moss-covered rocks. "Close your eyes and feel," she instructed. Michael obeyed, feeling somewhat ridiculous, but gradually something strange began to happen. The sound of water seemed amplified, reverberating in his body as if each drop told a story. A tingling rose up his legs, spread through his torso, reached his head. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised. The colors seemed more intense, the contours more defined. "What's happening to me?" he asked, frightened. "Your senses are awakening," Margaret replied naturally. "Years of city noise and denial of your essence numbed your perception. Now, little by little, you begin to reconnect." That night, after dinner, Margaret announced she would take him to the forest for a welcome ritual. Dawn, more reserved about family traditions, appeared apprehensive. "Are you sure it's already time, Mother?" she asked, casting a worried look at her son. "Time accelerates," Margaret answered enigmatically. "We cannot wait." Michael, Dawn, and Margaret walked along a trail illuminated only by the full moon. The air was impregnated with intense smells: damp earth, decomposing leaves, nocturnal flowers. They arrived at a clearing where a circle of stones had been arranged. In the center, a small fire crackled. "This place has existed for generations," Margaret explained. "Our ancestors performed their rituals of connection with the invisible here." They sat around the fire. Margaret removed from a leather bag various items: dried herbs, crystals, feathers, a small drum. With precise gestures, she began to burn the herbs, whose penetrating aroma permeated the air. The rhythmic sound of the drum filled the clearing. Michael felt transported. The flames seemed to dance in synchrony with the beats, creating shadows that moved like living entities. He closed his eyes, letting himself be carried by the experience. That was when the sensation arose, a tingling at the nape of his neck, as if someone or something was watching him from the shadows. He opened his eyes and held his breath. There, on the edge of the clearing, a golden-coated dog was staring at him intensely. It showed no fear or aggression, only absolute attention, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Grandma," Michael whispered, not taking his eyes off the animal. "That dog—" Margaret interrupted her chant and turned around. Seeing the animal, her eyes widened in a mixture of surprise and reverence. "He has arrived," she murmured. The dog, a majestic German shepherd with golden eyes, calmly crossed the stone circle and approached Michael. Everyone remained motionless, as if witnessing a sacred event. The animal sat down next to Michael, resting its head lightly on his leg. "What does this mean?" asked Michael, feeling a strange familiarity with the animal, as if they already knew each other. "It means you have been chosen," Margaret replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "He is the guardian of two worlds, the messenger who appears when one era is about to end and another must begin." On the way back home, the dog naturally followed them, as if it had always belonged to that place. Dawn observed the animal with a mixture of fascination and fear. "Don't you remember the stories, Mother?" asked Margaret, noticing her apprehension. "This is the sign we've been waiting for generations." That night, Michael allowed the dog to sleep in his room. As he stroked the animal's soft fur, he felt an inexplicable peace. There were still many questions, but for the first time in years he felt exactly where he should be. He fell into a deep sleep, and in his dreams he saw himself again in an unknown place, an immense marble cathedral where multitudes gathered in silence. In the center, an open coffin where rested the body of an elderly man dressed in white, and surprisingly the same golden dog that now slept at his feet advanced among the crowd, solemnly climbing onto the coffin, while everyone watched in stunned silence. Michael awoke with a start, the image of the cathedral still vivid in his mind. He looked around disoriented until he found the dog lying at the foot of the bed, watching him attentively with those golden, penetrating eyes. "It was just a dream," he murmured to himself, though a part of him knew it wasn't. "True." He got up and walked to the kitchen, where Margaret was already preparing breakfast. The aroma of homemade bread filled the room. "I dreamed of a cathedral," said Michael without preamble. "There was a man in white in a coffin. The Pope, I think. And the dog was there." Margaret stopped what she was doing and looked at him fixedly. "Tell me everything," she asked, pulling out a chair. "Every detail." Michael described the dream, the imposing St. Peter's Basilica, the silent crowds, the open coffin where Pope Francis rested, and the golden dog that, inexplicably, climbed onto the coffin while everyone watched. "It's the announcement," said Margaret with a grave voice. "It's beginning faster than I imagined." "The announcement of what?" asked Michael, exasperated. "Grandma, I need to understand what's happening to me." Margaret sighed deeply, as if finally deciding to reveal a secret kept for a long time. "Come," she said, leading him to a back room in the house that had always remained locked. Upon opening the door, Michael encountered a room filled with ancient books, maps, crystals, and artifacts that seemed to belong to different spiritual traditions. Margaret removed a carved wooden box from a shelf. Inside it rested a necklace of dark stones and jade. "This necklace belonged to my great-grandmother, who received it from her mother, and so on for generations," Margaret said, picking up the necklace with reverence. "Each piece tells a story. Of our people, of our purpose." She handed the necklace to Michael, who felt a slight tingling upon touching it. "The dog that appeared to you is known among the Guardians as the Messenger, the Guardian of two worlds. He appears when the veil between the living and the ancestors is about to be torn, when a great transition is coming." Margaret paused, observing her grandson's reaction. "His presence is a sign, Michael. A sign that you have been chosen for an important role in this transition." "Chosen by whom?" he questioned, still skeptical. "By the ancestors, by the forces that govern the balance between worlds. This goes beyond our limited understanding." Dawn entered the room, bringing a tray with tea. Her face showed concern. "Don't frighten him, Mother. He just returned to us." "There is no time for half-truths," retorted Margaret. "The signs are accelerating." Michael placed the necklace around his neck, feeling a strange comfort in doing so. The dog, which had silently followed them, approached and touched the necklace with its muzzle as if recognizing it. "What should I do now?" asked Michael. "Learn. Prepare yourself." Margaret touched his face with affection. "Your senses are awakening, but this is just the beginning. You need to understand the meaning of your visions, learn to control your expanded perceptions, reconnect with the ancestral wisdom that runs in your blood." In the days that followed, Michael dedicated himself entirely to Margaret's teachings. He learned about the properties of plants, about purification rituals, about the importance of dreams as messages from the collective unconscious. The dog, whom he decided to call Guardian, became his constant shadow, following him in every step, observing him with those eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom of ages. Meanwhile, strange phenomena intensified. During a walk in the forest, Michael noticed that he could feel subtle vibrations emanating from stones when Guardian touched them. One morning he observed how birds formed a perfect circle in the sky above the animal, as if revering it. Small wild animals approached without fear, creating a scene that seemed to come from a mystical tale. The visions also became more frequent and vivid. The cathedral, the Pope, the dog on the coffin. These images visited him not only during sleep, but also in moments of meditation or even when he simply observed the horizon, and more. He began to notice details like the absolute silence that reigned at the moment when the dog climbed onto the coffin, the look of astonishment on the cardinals' faces, the way the animal seemed to emanate its own light. You are connecting with an event that hasn't happened yet, but that already exists in spiritual time, explained Margaret. This is a rare ability, even among the guardians. On a particularly hot afternoon, while resting in the shade of a centennial tree, Michael decided to ask the question that tormented him. The Pope is going to die, isn't he? Is that what I'm seeing? Margaret looked at him with serenity. Every living being one day leaves this plane, Michael. But what you see is not about the pontiff's departure. It's about what comes after. The dog is a symbol of transition, of protection during the passage between worlds. Its presence at the event symbolizes something much greater that is coming. That night, Michael felt a different restlessness. He couldn't sleep, assailed by a sensation of urgency he didn't understand. He decided to walk in the garden, accompanied by Guardian. The sky was incredibly starry, the Milky Way stretching like a river of light over Hope Ridge. Suddenly, Guardian became alert, ears raised, body tense. He turned toward the forest and emitted a long, melancholy howl that seemed to echo through the mountains. At that same moment, Michael felt a change in the air, as if an invisible electric current ran through the environment. "What is it, friend?" he asked, caressing the animal's head. In response, Guardian began to walk toward the forest, occasionally stopping to make sure Michael was following. It was as if he wanted to show him something. Michael hesitated for a moment, but then decided to trust the animal's instinct. He quickly returned to the house to get a flashlight and followed the dog along the trail that led to the heart of the woods. The forest at night was a completely different world. Mysterious sounds, shadows that seemed to move, aromas intensified by nocturnal humidity. Guardian advanced with confidence, as if knowing every inch of that territory. Michael followed him, feeling a mixture of apprehension and growing fascination. After almost an hour walking through increasingly narrow and unknown trails, Guardian stopped in front of a rocky formation covered with moss and vines. At first glance, it seemed just another part of the natural landscape, but something in the animal's eyes indicated they had reached their destination. Michael approached, confused. He directed the beam of the flashlight at the rock, seeing nothing special. That's when Guardian positioned himself in front of a certain point and began to dig the soil with his front paws, revealing what appeared to be a carved stone. "What is this?" murmured Michael, kneeling to examine it better. He cleaned the earth and moss, discovering with astonishment that the stone was engraved with symbols similar to those on the necklace he carried. He felt the object vibrate slightly against his chest, as if responding to the presence of those ancient symbols. Seized by a sudden intuition, Michael removed the necklace and positioned it on the stone. Immediately, the symbols began to emit a faint, bluish glow. Guardian backed up a few steps, as if waiting for what would come next. With a deep rumble, the rocky formation slowly began to move, revealing a narrow opening, similar to the entrance of a cave. A cold air laden with ancestral aromas emanated from inside. Michael hesitated. The discovery was too astounding, seemed unreal. He looked at Guardian, who kept his eyes fixed on the opening, as if encouraging him to proceed. "You want me to go in there?" he asked, petting the animal's head. In response, Guardian advanced toward the cave entrance. Michael took a deep breath and followed him, illuminating the way with the flashlight. The narrow tunnel soon opened into a large subterranean chamber. What Michael saw there left him speechless. The walls were covered with cave paintings depicting human figures, animals, and cosmic symbols. In the center, a circular stone altar rose, surrounded by crystals of various sizes and colors. "Amazing," he whispered, marveling. "It must be hundreds of years old." As he approached the altar, he noticed there were inscriptions in Latin and, surprisingly, also in archaic English. Underneath the altar, in carefully organized niches, rested ancient artifacts, rudimentary, musical instruments, statuettes, aged scrolls. The most impressive discovery, however, was on the wall opposite the entrance, an elaborate mural depicting a sequence of events. In the first frame, a human figure, accompanied by a dog before a multitude. In the second, what appeared to be a ritual in a forest. And in the third, more disconcerting, the same human figure before a construction that resembled a cathedral, while the sky above showed stars in a specific configuration. Michael felt dizzy. The similarity to his visions was undeniable. But how could such an ancient mural depict events that hadn't yet happened? Guardian approached the altar, and to Michael's astonishment placed his paws on it. At that same moment, the entire cave seemed to pulse with an invisible energy. The crystals began to emit a soft glow, creating a play of lights and shadows on the chamber walls. Michael couldn't find words to describe what he was witnessing. That's when he heard footsteps approaching. He turned quickly, pointing the flashlight at the cave entrance. Margaret appeared, leaning on her staff, her face serene as if she had expected to find him there. "Grandma, how did you know where to find me?" "I felt the energy moving," she replied, looking around with reverence. "The Chamber of Guardians has been opened after generations. The ancestors guided me here." "You knew about this place?" "I knew from stories passed down through generations. I've never been here personally. Only the chosen ones can find this chamber." Margaret approached the mural, touching it with the tips of her wrinkled fingers. "The prophecies of transition," she murmured, "written more than 300 years ago by our ancestors, who already foresaw this moment." "What moment?" "Grandma?" asked Michael, exasperated. "What does all this mean?" Margaret turned to him, her eyes shining with unusual intensity. "It means you were chosen, Michael. Chosen to be the human guardian during the Great Transition, when the veil between the material and spiritual worlds will become thinner." She pointed to the mural. "These images show the path you must follow, the events that will unfold." "And the Pope? And the dog on the coffin? What does that have to do with all this?" "It's a symbol, Michael. The pontiff represents the old spiritual order. His passage, with the blessing of the animal guardian, marks the beginning of a new time, where ancestral traditions and modern spirituality will find a new balance." Michael sat on the floor of the cave, trying to assimilate all that information. It seemed too absurd, as if he had entered a fantasy film. However, he couldn't deny what was before his eyes, nor the sensations he had experienced since arriving at Hope Ridge. "And if I don't want this responsibility," he finally asked, "what if I simply return to Chicago, to my normal life?" Margaret smiled with understanding. "You could try. But the calling would continue inside you like a thirst impossible to quench. Besides," she gestured to Guardian, who remained motionless on the altar, "the messenger has already chosen you. There's no turning back." Guardian descended from the altar and approached Michael, resting his head in his lap, as if wanting to comfort him. The gesture, so simple and affectionate, brought tears to Michael's eyes. He felt a deep connection with the animal, a union that transcended words. "What should I do then?" he asked, finally accepting that something extraordinary was happening in his life. "First, you must complete your initiation. Then, prepare for what is to come." Margaret pointed to the instruments under the altar. "These objects are sacred, tools that will help you in your journey." While they examined the artifacts by the light of the flashlight, they heard a distant sound, the bell of the Hope Ridge Church, ringing in the middle of the night. "How strange," commented Michael. "It's almost 3 in the morning." Margaret's face became grave. "Something has happened," she said. "The bell only rings at odd hours when there's a significant event." Guardian seemed to understand the seriousness of the moment. He rose and walked toward the exit of the cave, indicating they should follow. Michael helped Margaret to get up, and together they left the secret chamber, which silently closed behind them as soon as they passed through the portal. As they descended the trail back to town, Michael couldn't help but notice how the stars seemed to shine with abnormal intensity, as if the sky itself were on alert. Guardian led the way, his golden fur almost luminous in the darkness of the forest. "What do you think happened?" asked Michael, helping his grandmother cross a fallen trunk. "I'm not certain," Margaret replied. "But I fear it's the beginning of what was prophesied." When they reached the edge of the forest, they saw lights on in several houses, despite the late hour. People were coming out into the streets, some still in sleepwear, talking in agitated voices. Something had left all of Hope Ridge in a state of commotion. Michael, Margaret, and Guardian hurried toward the center of Hope Ridge, guided by the persistent sound of the church bell. Upon arriving at the main square, they found a considerable group of residents gathered, many with cell phones in hand, animatedly conversing. "What's happening?" Michael asked a young man who was hurriedly passing by. "You haven't heard?" replied the young man, surprised. "Pope Francis is very ill. They say he won't make it through the night. It's all over the news." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He exchanged a significant look with Margaret, whose expression confirmed what they both thought. The visions were coming true. "Let's go home," said Margaret, with urgency in her voice. "We need to prepare." The way back was silent, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Dawn was waiting for them on the porch, visibly concerned. "Where were you? I was so anxious." She stopped upon noticing the serious expression of both. "What happened?" "The hour has come," Margaret replied simply. "Light the candles on the altar and prepare the guest room. We will have visitors soon." Dawn didn't question, accustomed to trusting her mother's intuition. Michael, on the other hand, was full of questions, but knew that was not the moment. The next morning, the official news arrived. Pope Francis had passed away during the night. The Catholics' world was in mourning, and preparations for the funeral had already begun. Social networks and television channels spoke of nothing else. Michael followed everything with a sense of unreality. The images of the Vatican that appeared on television were exactly like in his visions: St. Peter's Basilica, crowds gathered in vigil, the pontiff's body being prepared to be displayed. "What happens now?" he asked Margaret, who was sitting in her rocking chair, strangely calm. "Now we wait," she replied. "Events will unfold as they should." On the third day after the news, while Michael was helping Dawn in the garden, an unknown car parked in front of the house. A tall, thin, middle-aged man wearing sober but elegant clothes got out of the vehicle. Guardian, who was lying in the shade of a tree, immediately became alert but showed no hostility. "Can I help you?" asked Michael, approaching. The stranger observed him with intensity before answering. "You must be Michael Oliver. My name is Father Thomas Sinclair. I've come from Rome to speak with Mrs. Margaret Oliver." Michael felt disconcerted. How would a Vatican priest know his grandmother? "She's expecting you," said Dawn, who had silently approached. "Please come in." Inside the house, Margaret had already prepared tea and cookies, as if she really had been expecting visitors. She received the priest with a cordiality that suggested familiarity, although Michael was certain he had never seen him before. "Finally we meet in person, Father Thomas," she said, indicating a chair for him to sit down. "Although I have felt your presence long before you arrived at our door." The priest smiled slightly. "The stories about your abilities were not exaggerated, Mrs. Margaret." Guardian entered the room and, to Michael's surprise, approached the visitor without hesitation, allowing him to pet him. "And this is the famous dog," commented Thomas with reverence. "The Vatican secret archives mention his coming." "The archives mention Guardian?" asked Michael, incredulous. The priest removed from his briefcase a leather folder, from which he extracted ancient documents protected by plastic covers. They were yellowed pages, written in Latin with detailed illustrations. "These are copies of manuscripts from the 17th century, documented by a Jesuit who lived among the Native Americans. They speak of a special lineage of spiritual guardians and of a golden dog that would arise as a harbinger of a great transformation." He extended the documents to Michael. "The descriptions correspond perfectly to the animal that is here with us." Michael examined the documents with astonishment. The illustrations clearly showed a German shepherd with golden eyes, and among the Latin texts, he recognized some of the symbols he had seen in the cave and on his necklace. "Why is the Vatican interested in this?" he finally asked. Father Thomas hesitated, looking at Margaret as if asking permission to proceed. She nodded slightly. There are many spiritual traditions in the world, Michael. The Catholic Church is just one of them. Over the centuries, we have documented and studied spiritual manifestations from diverse cultures. He paused. There is a specific department in the Vatican, unknown to the public, that is dedicated to these investigations. I am part of it. And what exactly do you want from us? Michael couldn't hide his distrust. We want your presence at the Pope's funeral, Thomas replied directly. Or rather, the Guardian's presence. A heavy silence fell over the room. Dawn, who had remained silent until then, let out a muffled exclamation. "This is absurd," she protested. "You want to take a dog to the Pope's funeral?" "Not just any dog, Mrs. Oliver," replied Thomas with seriousness, "and not just any funeral. The ancient texts predict that the presence of the guardian of two worlds at the passage ceremony of a great spiritual leader is essential for maintaining cosmic balance during the approaching transition." Michael looked at Margaret, expecting her to reject that insane idea. To his surprise, she seemed to be seriously considering it. "The prophecies mention this, in fact," confirmed Margaret. "But they also say that the human guardian must accompany the animal. Michael would have to go to Rome." "Precisely," agreed Thomas. "We have everything prepared. Documents, tickets, accommodation. We could leave tomorrow." "This is madness," protested Michael. "How would you explain the presence of a dog at the Pope's funeral? And why should I trust you?" "As for the dog's presence, we have our means," replied Thomas with a small smile. "As for trusting us, I'm not asking you to trust the Vatican, or me. Trust the visions you've been having. Trust what your heart tells you." Michael closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. The last few weeks had turned his life upside down. He had witnessed things that defied his rational understanding, experienced sensations he never imagined possible. And now a Vatican representative appeared in Hope Ridge, confirming his visions and requesting his participation in an event of global proportions. "I need to think," he said finally. "Naturally," agreed Thomas, "but not for long. The funeral will be in 3 days." "We would be honored with your company for dinner, Father Thomas," invited Margaret, skillfully changing the subject. Meanwhile, Michael can reflect on his decision. After the meal, Michael retreated to the garden, seeking some clarity. Guardian followed him, as always. They sat under an ancient tree, observing the starry sky that was beginning to emerge. "What do you think about all this, friend?" he asked the dog, who observed him with his golden, mysterious eyes. "Should we trust this priest? Should we go to Rome?" In response, Guardian rested his head on his knee, looking at him with an intensity that seemed to communicate more than words. Michael felt an inexplicable certainty grow within him. Regardless of the Vatican's motives, his destiny and Guardian's were intertwined with the events unfolding globally. The decision was made. They would go to Rome. The plane landed at Rome Fiumicino International Airport on a clear spring afternoon. Michael observed through the window the eternal city that stretched to the horizon, its ancient monuments blended with modern architecture. Like layers of human history superimposed in a single landscape, the journey had been surprisingly smooth, considering the circumstances. Thanks to Vatican contacts, Guardian traveled in the cabin as an emotional support dog, with special documentation that left no room for questioning. Throughout the flight, he remained calmly lying at Michael's feet, as if flying over the Atlantic was something routine for him. "Welcome to Rome," said Father Thomas, who awaited them in the arrival hall. "How was the flight?" "Smoother than I expected," replied Michael, still trying to assimilate the fact that he was on the other side of the ocean because of an ancient prophecy involving his dog and the Pope. A black car with tinted windows was waiting outside. Michael discreetly noticed the small Vatican emblem on the side of the vehicle. Guardian entered the automobile without hesitation, settling in, as if perfectly understanding the importance of his mission. "Where are we going?" asked Michael, as the driver skillfully maneuvered through Rome's intense traffic. "To a private residence near the Vatican," explained Thomas. "You need to rest today. Tomorrow we'll have much to prepare before the ceremony." Michael observed the streets of Rome through the window, marveled at the mixture of eras the city presented. ancient ruins alongside modern cafes, secular churches surrounded by designer boutiques. It was as if time there had a different dimension, thicker, denser with meanings. They arrived at an elegant Renaissance-style house situated on a quiet street. A well-maintained garden surrounded the property, offering privacy and shade. "This house belongs to the religious order to which I am linked," explained Thomas, as he led them inside. "You'll be comfortable here." The interior was a harmonious combination of classic architecture and modern comfort. Michael was led to a spacious room on the second floor, with a large four-poster bed and windows that opened to a partial view of the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which stood out against the evening sky. "Rest a bit," recommended Thomas. "We'll dine at 8. There are some people you need to meet." Alone in the room with Guardian, Michael sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that was happening. Just a week ago, he was immersed in his corporate life in Chicago, concerned with mergers and acquisitions. Now he was in Rome, staying in a house connected to the Vatican, about to participate in an event of historic proportions, guided by mystical visions and an apparently supernatural dog. "How did we end up in this story, friend?" he asked Guardian, who had lain down on the Persian carpet near the window, his attentive eyes fixed on his human. At night, he went down for dinner and found Thomas in the company of 3 people, a middle-aged woman with Native American features, dressed with elegant simplicity, an elderly man of academic aspect, with tortoiseshell glasses and white hair, and a young woman of approximately 25 years, with a serene presence and extraordinarily clear eyes. "Michael, allow me to introduce you," said Thomas. "This is Professor Emily Redwood, a Native American anthropologist specializing in indigenous spiritual traditions." The woman extended her hand with a warm smile. "Your dog is exactly as described in the ancient texts I've studied," she commented. "It's an honor to witness this." "Professor Heinrich Müller," continued Thomas, indicating the elderly gentleman. "Theologian and historian, Special Vatican Advisor for Esoteric Matters." The professor greeted Michael with a firm handshake. "Fascinating," he murmured, observing Guardian with academic interest. "Absolutely fascinating." "And this is Sophia Ricci," concluded Thomas, presenting the young woman, anthropologist and sensitive. "She's here to help you during the ceremony." Sophia smiled gently, and upon shaking Michael's hand, he felt a slight current of energy, as if something passed between them. Guardian, who generally kept his distance from strangers, immediately approached her, allowing her to pet him. "He recognizes a kindred soul," commented Sophia with a melodious voice. During dinner, served in an elegant dining room decorated with Renaissance frescoes, the conversation revolved around the imminent event. "The prophecies are clear," explained Professor Müller between sips of red wine. "When the Guardian of 2 worlds appears, a great transition is underway. His presence at the passage ceremony of a spiritual leader is crucial to maintain the balance between the worlds." "But why the Pope?" questioned Michael. "What does he have to do with the spiritual traditions of America?" "The authentic spiritual traditions of all cultures are interconnected in their essence," replied Emily. "Pope Francis, in particular, had a special connection with indigenous traditions and the spirituality of nature. His encyclical on the environment reflects this." "And what about me?" asked Michael. "What exactly is my role in all this?" A momentary silence fell over the table. It was Sophia who finally answered, "You are the human guardian, Michael, the intermediary. Without you, the dog is just an animal, however special it may be. Together, you form the bridge between worlds. During the ceremony, you'll need to stay connected to both the material and spiritual planes." "How will I do that? I'm still learning about all this." "You already possess the necessary tools," intervened Thomas. "The necklace your grandmother gave you, your lineage, the abilities you began to awaken in Hope Ridge, and you'll be supported by us." After dinner, Michael and Sophia walked through the garden under Rome's starry sky, with Guardian silently following them. The young woman explained more details about what would happen the next day. "The funeral will be held in St. Peter's Square, with the body displayed in the Basilica. There will be thousands of people, world leaders, representatives of various religions." She paused. During the final ceremony, when the body is about to be taken for burial, you and Guardian should approach the coffin." "How will we do that with all the security?" asked Michael, concerned. "That has already been arranged. You'll be among the official entourage. When the moment comes, you'll know what to do." Michael observed the stars above Rome, trying to find some meaning in all of it. "I'm afraid," he confessed finally. "What if I fail? What if this whole plan is just a great madness?" Sophia gently touched his arm. "Fear is natural when we face the unknown. But you were chosen, Michael. Not by us, not by the Vatican, but by forces that transcend our limited understanding." She looked at Guardian, who was observing the sky as if reading messages in the stars. "And you are not alone." That night, lying in the ancient bed under the ceiling decorated with angels and cherubs, Michael felt small before the magnitude of the events surrounding him. But, with Guardian lying at his side, he also felt a strange peace. Whatever his destiny, he had found his path. He fell asleep with his hand on the golden fur of the animal, while the lights of Rome shone under the spring Italian sky. The morning of the funeral dawned with a sky of perfect blue over Rome. Michael was awakened by Thomas even before the sun rose. "It's time to prepare," said the priest, handing him a perfectly tailored black suit. "The ceremony will begin at 9, but we need to be positioned much earlier." Michael felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders as he dressed. Guardian watched him attentively, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. Around his neck, Michael placed the ancestral necklace, which seemed to pulse lightly against his skin. A silent breakfast was served for the small group. Sophia wore an elegant and discreet black dress, her hair tied in an austere bun. Professor Müller and Emily were also formally dressed for the occasion. "The plan is as follows," explained Thomas as they finished the meal. "You will be in the section reserved for special delegations. When the right moment comes, Sophia will guide you to the place where you should be with Guardian." "How will I know when it's the right moment?" asked Michael, anxiety showing in his voice. "You will know," replied Sophia with conviction. "Everything you saw in your visions will come true." The journey to the Vatican was made in 2 official cars. The streets of Rome were exceptionally empty, blocked for the historic event. As they approached St. Peter's Square, however, the crowd was impressive. Hundreds of thousands of people from all parts of the world gathered to pay their last homage to the pontiff. The group was led through a side entrance, avoiding the crowds. Guardian followed obediently without a leash, behaving with an almost human dignity. They passed through various security points, where Thomas presented special credentials that left no room for questioning. Finally, they were accommodated in a reserved area, close to the altar mounted in the square, from where they could perfectly see the open coffin of the Pope displayed under the Roman sky. World leaders, cardinals, representatives of various religions occupied their designated places. The crowd spread through the square and adjacent streets in a respectful silence, punctuated only by the occasional sob of emotion. Michael sat between Sophia and Thomas, with Guardian at his feet. His heart was beating rapidly, his hands sweating. The reality of the moment finally hit him with full force. He was about to participate in an event that would be seen by billions of people around the world, guided by mystical visions and ancestral traditions that until a few weeks ago he completely ignored. "Breathe deeply," whispered Sophia, noticing his anxiety. "Focus on the necklace, on the energy it transmits. Let yourself be guided." The ceremony began with Gregorian chant that echoed through the square, amplified by discreet speakers. The Dean of the College of Cardinals presided over the funeral, his grave voice reciting prayers in Latin. Incense rose in delicate spirals under the morning sun. Michael observed everything with a strange sensation of déjà vu. Each detail corresponded exactly to his visions. The arrangement of the altar, the cardinal's vestments, even the pattern of clouds in the sky. Gradually, an inexplicable calm began to envelop him, as if he were being guided by an invisible force. The ceremony proceeded with speeches from religious leaders and authorities. Tributes were paid, biblical passages were read. Time seemed to flow differently, sometimes dragging, sometimes accelerating. Michael maintained himself in a state of tranquil alertness, aware of every movement around him. It was during the final homily that Sophia lightly touched his arm. "It's almost time," she whispered. "When the last chant begins, we should move." Michael nodded, feeling a strange tingling run through his body. Guardian rose, as if he had heard and understood Sophia's words. The choir began the final chant, ethereal voices that seemed to float over the crowd. Sophia made a discreet signal, and they stood up, moving silently toward a position closer to the coffin. Guardian followed with impressive solemnity, his golden fur shimmering under the Mediterranean sun. They positioned themselves near the staircase that led to the coffin. Various dignitaries waited there for the final moment of farewell. No one seemed to question the presence of Michael or Guardian, as if they were a natural part of the ceremony. "Now," whispered Sophia, when the chant reached its apex. Michael felt the necklace warm against his skin. A wave of energy ran through his body, and he had the clear sensation that he was no longer fully present in the physical plane. It was as if his consciousness expanded, able to perceive dimensions beyond common vision. Guardian moved first, climbing with solemn elegance the steps that led to the open coffin. There was no reaction from the guards or the nearby cardinals. It was as if the animal were invisible to everyone, except for Michael and Sophia. Following the dog, Michael approached the coffin where the Pope's body rested. Seen up close, the Haiti pontiff seemed serene, as if asleep. Guardian positioned himself beside the coffin, and to Michael's astonishment, rose with a fluid movement, placing himself on it. It was at that moment that Michael realized everyone could see what was happening. A murmur of amazement ran through the crowd. Cameras directed themselves to the inexplicable event. The cardinals observed in stunned silence, but no one interfered. Guardian remained motionless on the coffin, his golden eyes fixed on the sky. Michael, guided by an impulse he didn't completely understand, placed his hand on the necklace and closed his eyes. Instantly, he was invaded by an overwhelming vision. He saw the Pope's spirit rising, accompanied by a golden light that emanated from Guardian. He saw the veil between worlds momentarily becoming translucent. He saw luminous entities, ancestors, angels, spiritual guides, aligning themselves in a ceremony parallel to the one occurring on the physical plane. Time seemed to freeze. Michael felt simultaneously present in St. Peter's Square and in a dimension beyond human understanding. Words in an ancient language he had never studied but somehow understood formed in his mind. The bridge is established. The cycle renews itself. The veil opens for the new time. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ceased. Michael opened his eyes. Guardian descended from the coffin with the same dignity with which he had ascended. The crowd remained in absolute silence, as if all had witnessed something that transcended rational understanding. "It is done," whispered Sophia, with tears in her eyes. "The transition has been blessed." Michael felt a deep peace mixed with an overwhelming exhaustion. Guardian approached him, touching his muzzle to his hand as if offering support. Together they followed Sophia, who discreetly led them away from the central area. As they moved away, the ceremony continued, resuming its original rhythm. But something had changed. Michael could feel it in the air, in the light, in the very vibration around him. A cycle had been completed, and a new one was beginning. On the monitors scattered throughout the square, Michael momentarily glimpsed the images that would be transmitted to the world. A golden dog on the Pope's coffin, looking at the sky, while an unknown young American remained standing beside it, with an ancient, tribal necklace around his neck, and an expression of transcendence on his face. Thomas was waiting for them at a discreet point. "Let's go," he said, quickly leading them to the car that awaited them. "The whole world saw what happened. Soon everyone will be looking for you." As the vehicle moved away from the Vatican, Michael looked through the window at the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which stood out against the blue sky of Rome. The ceremony was complete, but something told him that his journey was just beginning. Tentar novamente continuar editar. Preparou-se para continuar tradução com nomes americanos. Shall continue translating. The story from Portuguese to English with American names and locations. I'll pick up where I left off and continue with the same style and tone. ensuring I maintain the narrative flow. I'll keep all the same plot elements, just changing the character and location names to American ones. Here's where I'll continue from. As the vehicle moved away from the Vatican, Michael looked through the window at the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which stood out against the blue sky of Rome. The ceremony was complete, but something told him that his journey was just beginning. 1 month after the events at the Vatican, Michael walked along the trail leading to the ritual clearing in Hope Ridge. The setting sun cast a golden light over the mountains, creating long shadows that stretched across the valley. Guardian trotted ahead of him, occasionally stopping to wait, his eyes always vigilant. The return to the United States had been discreet, organized by the Vatican to avoid the attention of the world media. Images of the mysterious dog at the Pope's funeral had spread globally, generating theories and interpretations of all kinds. Some spoke of a miracle, others of an omen, still others of some kind of symbolic protest. No one, however, had managed to identify Michael or discover the origin of the animal. Meanwhile, in Hope Ridge, a silent transformation had begun. Young people from the community, attracted by stories about recent events, had started to seek out Margaret, eager to learn about ancestral traditions. The healer's house had transformed into an informal center for spiritual studies, where ancient practices were revitalized and adapted for the contemporary world. Michael reached the clearing, where Margaret was already waiting, seated on a flat stone. Around her, forming a semicircle, were about 10 young people, men and women of various origins and ages, united by the desire to understand and participate in the spiritual awakening that was announcing itself. "Welcome, my grandson," greeted Margaret with a serene smile. "We were waiting for you to begin." Michael sat beside his grandmother, while Guardian positioned himself at the center of the clearing, as if supervising the meeting. A young woman with Native American features lit a small ritual fire whose perfumed smoke rose in precise spirals, almost motionless in the still evening air. "You know parts of the story," began Margaret, addressing those present. "You know about the Guardian of Two Worlds, about the ceremony in Rome, about the prophecies that came true. But today you will hear directly from Michael what happened afterward, what it means for all of us, for the world." Michael took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. In the past weeks, he had gone through an intense process of integrating his experiences, trying to understand the greater meaning of everything he had witnessed. "What I experienced in Rome was just the beginning," he started, his calm voice echoing in the clearing as the sun set. "During the ceremony, when Guardian climbed onto the Pope's coffin, something happened that transcends human words. The veil between worlds became thin, almost transparent. I could see what normally remains hidden from our eyes." The young people listened in absolute silence, their faces illuminated by the crackling fire. Michael continued, "I saw the ancestors gathered in a great circle, not just from the Christian tradition, but from all authentic spiritual traditions of the world. I saw luminous entities that seemed like guardians of interdimensional portals. And, most importantly, I clearly saw what is to come, an era of reconnection with ancestral wisdom, a time when the artificial division between science and spirituality will begin to dissolve." A young woman with curly hair timidly raised her hand. "And the Vatican? What did they really want from you and Guardian?" Michael smiled slightly before answering. "The Vatican, or at least the secret department represented by Father Thomas, understands more than we imagine. For centuries they've collected knowledge from spiritual traditions from around the world. They knew of the prophecies and recognized the signs when they appeared. They understood that the event needed to happen exactly as it did, so that the planetary transition could begin harmoniously." Margaret, who until then had remained silent, took the floor. "What you need to understand, young Guardians, is that we are on the threshold of a new era. The old divisions between different spiritual traditions are dissolving. The knowledge guarded for generations in forests like ours is uniting with the knowledge guarded in cathedrals, in mosques, in temples. It is a time of synthesis, not separation." Michael observed the faces around the circle. He saw there the future, young people who grew up with technology and science, but who felt the ancestral call in their blood, the need to reconnect with the earth, with traditions, with the invisible. "And what about Oliver Industries?" asked a bespectacled young man with a Chicago accent. "Are you going back to your corporate life?" The question provoked light laughter in the group, but Michael answered with seriousness. "The company is still there and will continue, but my vision of it has completely changed. We are implementing profound transformations, rigorous environmental policies, support for traditional communities, funding for research that unites science and ancestral wisdom. Material wealth can also be an instrument for spiritual evolution when used with consciousness." Another young man with black skin and calloused hands of someone who works the land raised his hand. "And guardian? What is he really? A common animal, a spirit, both?" All eyes turned to the magnificent German shepherd that remained seated beside Michael, his golden eyes reflecting the flames of the fire. Michael smiled, caressing the animal's head. "Guardian is a mystery that I don't need to completely unveil. He is a being that exists simultaneously in various planes of consciousness, a living bridge between worlds." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In the weeks since our return, I have observed how he interacts with the environment. Plants grow more vigorously where he rests. Wild animals approach without fear. People report sensations of peace and mental clarity in his presence. He is a catalyst for healing and transformation." Dawn, who had remained until then as a silent observer at the edge of the clearing, approached the circle, bringing a basket covered with an embroidered cloth. She sat beside her mother and son, completing 3 generations of guardians gathered together. "I brought something for all of you," she said, removing the cloth. In the basket were small necklaces, similar to the one Michael wore, but simpler. Each contained a single jade stone and beads of native seeds. "These are amulets of protection and connection," explained Margaret, "made with materials from our land, energized with the same prayers that our ancestors used for generations. Each of you will receive one, as a symbol of the commitment you make today, to be a guardian of ancient wisdom in modern times." One by one, the young people approached to receive their necklaces. Dawn placed them around their necks, while Margaret whispered a brief blessing in a mixture of English, Native American languages, and words from African languages. Michael observed, moved, the birth of a new cycle, the continuity of a tradition that had almost been lost. When the last young person received their necklace, Guardian rose and walked to the center of the clearing. Everyone observed in respectful silence as the animal raised its muzzle to the sky and emitted a long melodious howl that echoed through the mountains. At that same moment, Michael felt an intense vibration emanate from the ground beneath his feet. "It's happening," whispered Margaret with tears in her eyes. "The activation." One by one, the small amulets began to emit a soft glow, visible even in the twilight. Michael felt his own necklace, warm against his chest, pulsing like a second heart. The young people looked in admiration at their necklaces and at each other, as if they could see something beyond physical appearance for the first time. A girl of no more than 16 let out an exclamation of surprise. I can see the colors around everyone." Others began to report similar experiences, intensified perceptions, visions of energy fields, sensations of deep connection with the surrounding forest. Margaret smiled, nodding. "It is the awakening of subtle senses. You are beginning to perceive what has always been there, but which you had been taught to ignore. This is just the beginning." Michael rose and walked to the center of the clearing, beside Guardian. There, under the first stars that began to dot the sky, he spoke with a confidence he had never felt before. "Our work is just beginning. The event in Rome was a catalyst, a sign for the world, even if many still don't understand its meaning. But here, in this sacred place, among these ancient mountains, we are planting the seeds of a new consciousness that will grow and spread. We are the guardians of the transition, the bridges between the old and the new, between tradition and the future." Guardian gently touched his muzzle to Michael's hand, as if sealing a pact. At that same moment, all those present felt a wave of energy run through the circle, an invisible current that connected them to each other and to the earth beneath their feet. Night had fallen completely now. The sky above Hope Ridge shone with thousands of stars, free from the light pollution of big cities. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees around the clearing, bringing with it the aroma of herbs and ashes from the fire. Margaret rose, with Dawn's help, and walked to Michael. Her eyes, despite her advanced age, shone with renewed vitality. "You returned to us as an executive disconnected from your roots, Michael, and now you've transformed into what you were always destined, to be a guardian, an intermediary between worlds, a protector of ancestral knowledge." She touched his face with affection. "Your grandfather would be proud. All our ancestors are." The ceremony continued into the night. The young guardians learned the first ritual chants, the meditation postures, the ways of perceiving and interacting with the energies of nature. Under the guidance of Margaret, Dawn, and Michael, each began to discover their specific gifts. Some demonstrated affinity with medicinal plants, others with elements like water or fire, still others with communication with animals. When the moon reached its highest point in the sky, Margaret announced it was time to return to the secret chamber, so that the new guardians could know their ancestral legacy. Forming a silent procession, the group followed through the forest illuminated by moonlight, guided by Michael and Guardian. The entrance to the cave revealed itself without need of the necklace this time. It was as if the place recognized its legitimate guardians. As they entered the subterranean chamber, the crystals began to shine spontaneously, creating an environment of soft, colored light. The young people looked in wonder at the murals, the artifacts, the ancient inscriptions. Michael explained the meaning of each symbol, each object, each painting, knowledge that he had received directly during his visions in Rome, and that he continued to receive in his dreams and meditations. "This chamber doesn't belong just to our lineage," he explained. "It's a repository of universal wisdom, protected by generations of guardians around the world. There are similar places in the Andes, in the Himalayas, in the Australian desert, in African forests, all connected by invisible lines of energy, forming a network of protection around the planet." Margaret approached the central altar, where she had placed a small carved wooden box. "The time has come for the final revelation of this night," she announced, opening the box. From inside, she removed an ancient scroll, carefully preserved. With delicate gestures, she unrolled it on the altar. Everyone approached to see. It was a detailed map, showing Hope Ridge and the surrounding regions, but with markings and symbols that weren't part of any conventional cartography. "This is the map of portals," explained Margaret. "It shows the points where the veil between worlds is thinnest, where the energies of the earth are concentrated, where communication with ancestors and with other dimensions becomes possible. These are the sacred places that we must protect and preserve." Michael noticed something surprising on the map. Many of the marked points coincided with areas that Oliver Industries had recently acquired for supposed development projects. A sudden understanding hit him. It hadn't been coincidence. Something much greater had guided even his business decisions, preparing the way for what was to come. "These locations," he said, pointing to the markings on the map, "are now under legal protection. They will be transformed into natural and cultural reserves, administered by a council that will include representatives from traditional communities and from the new guardians." A murmur of approval ran through the group. Dawn smiled at her son, proud of the transformation she had witnessed in him. Guardian, who had remained patiently seated during the entire explanation, suddenly rose and walked to the mural on the opposite wall. With a movement of his muzzle, he indicated a specific part of the painting that Michael hadn't noticed before. A sequence of images showing people of different origins gathered in a circle, sharing knowledge, while a light descended from the sky upon them. "The last prophecy," murmured Margaret, moved. "The union of knowledge, the collective awakening." Michael felt a deep certainty as he contemplated that ancient image. The work was just beginning. The event in Rome had been a seed, planted in the collective consciousness of humanity. Here, in this circle of young guardians, another seed was germinating. And around the world, in other similar circles, the same process was underway. A silent awakening, a gradual reconnection with almost forgotten wisdom. As they left the chamber, already in the first hours of dawn, the sky above showed a shower of shooting stars, a rare spectacle that none of them had foreseen. Everyone stopped to observe, marveling at the beauty of the cosmos revealing itself above them. "A sign of approval," said Margaret, with a serene smile. As they walked back to the village, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey he had lived. From disconnected executive to guardian of ancestral knowledge, from skeptic to intermediary between worlds, from a man in search of meaning to someone who had found his deepest purpose. Guardian walked beside him, his presence a constant reminder of the mystery that permeates existence. The dog looked at him with those golden, unfathomable eyes, and Michael had the distinct impression that he was smiling. When they arrived at Margaret's house, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, tinting the sky with pinkish and golden hues. The young guardians said goodbye, each returning to their home, taking with them not just the sacred necklaces but a new perception of the world, a deeper understanding of their place in the great fabric of existence. Michael, Dawn, and Margaret sat on the porch observing the dawn. Guardian lay at their feet, finally allowing himself to relax after the night of intense activities. "And now?" asked Dawn, breaking the contemplative silence. "Now we live the present with awareness of the past and vision of the future," replied Margaret, each fulfilling their role in this great transition. Michael looked at the horizon, where the rising sun gilded the contours of the mountains of Hope Ridge. He felt a peace he had never experienced before, even amid the awareness of the responsibilities he now carried. "Now," he said with a serene smile, "we truly begin."